Hello, this is Brian.
And this is Stephanie.
Welcome to the making and the remaking of a codependent mind. We're going to revisit a topic that we did in a four-parter back in season 4, the subject of sex.
So feel free to go back to season 4 if you have not listened to those episodes yet, where we talk a lot about the role that sex played in your life and its connection to codependency and trauma. This time we're going to focus, though, more on sex as a tool, because that's the season we're in, relationship toolkit. So like we did with the rest of the tools, we're going to give a functional account. So be talking through what work does sex do in a relationship? What work can it do? What role does it play? So we're not, again, like communication, we're not going to be giving tips and tricks about what makes for good sex, what makes for bad sex. We want to know, is the sex productive in the relationship?
A good thing to do when doing that is to think about what sex can and can't do. Like we talked about in the money episode, people try to use the tools for a lot more than they're really designed to be used for. In money, it was a lot more obvious when it came to the design part because it's a man-made tool, and sex is more of an evolved tool. It is an evolved tool.
And sex is really interesting from an evolutionary perspective. People really haven't figured it out, mostly in regards to why it is such a pervasive reproductive strategy. So, in terms of sex as a tool, from an evolutionary perspective, it's reproduction. That's what it's for. That's what it was designed to do. But there were other options. And the first option was asexual reproduction. And that happened for billions of years. And the science isn't really clear as to why there was a movement from asexual reproduction, which is still there, why all these species developed around sexual reproduction. That was their primary strategy. And for many of them, human beings included, the only strategy for reproduction became sexual reproduction, which can come at an enormous cost. Like, it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder to achieve sexual reproduction than asexual reproduction.
Yeah, that's true. A lot more work goes into it.
For sure.
And it takes 2 instead of 1. Yeah.
Yep, there's that. And so, a lot of the science is investigating having 2 involved. What benefits does that accrue to the species? Because, again, the costs can be quite high. I mean, we think of some species, like the example of the praying mantis, where apparently the male gets eaten after the sex act.
That's not very beneficial to the male. So the role of sex in those particular creatures is it's fulfilling the need of their reproducing. But, at the individual level, it's not so great.
The evolutionary benefits accrue at the species level with sex as reproductive function, rather than at the individual level.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's not necessary for the individual's survival.
Yes, it's not like food and water, where thirst and hunger, those drives benefit the individual, because the more that the individual can eat and drink, the better their chance are to survive. But sexual reproduction, those benefits again accrue at a species level. Also, an interesting dimension is that we're the only species in the history of the world to even understand the connection between sex and reproduction.
Mm-hmm. And that's even very recently in the grand scheme of our own existence.
Yes, if you think of human beings evolving over the course of millions of years, reproductive consciousness, as they call it, is speculated to only have come in around the time where Homo sapiens, where we became the specific species of humans. I don't know, a few 100,000 years ago. I can't remember exactly when that happened. So back to this question of like, well, what is it built for sex? So for the mechanism to work from an evolutionary perspective, animals like us need to want to have sex without understanding what the benefit to the species or even to themselves that they will be able to have children, etc., would be. So the benefits have to be satisfying some basic urges, some amount of pleasure. So pleasure and satisfaction, you would see that the sex would be built for. And also, it seems that evolution rewards certain types of sex in certain types of species. So for instance, we are a pair bonding species, and it seems like sexual experiences that support that bonding have also been selected for in humans. So that, for instance, we have a physiological response to sex that includes things like the release of oxytocin, which is a bonding chemical that makes us feel closer to the person that we just had sex with.
Right. So there's going to be a reason for all of these. It's obvious. The pleasurable aspect is obvious. It feels good, so I want to do this. There's a motivation, but then also produces a feeling of connection along with it, which then goes along with what our species does when it comes to raising our children. It's more advantageous for us to do that as a unit.
So just to bring it back to the relationship work that we're talking about and we've been talking about over this season, which we have grouped into 3 categories: relationship work that we do that produces knowledge and understanding of each other and ourselves, relationship work that strengthens our sense of partnership, and then relationship work that preserves and protects our connection. And to our thinking, it's that the connection piece that sex can really be a powerful tool.
Yeah, this seems to be one of the more powerful tools, I think, when it comes to the connection piece, really.
We're talking about the relational context, sex in a relationship. Obviously, sex can occur outside of a relationship.
Yeah.
And that's fine. A number of the physical and emotional pleasures, psychological pleasures that come from sex can absolutely come from sex that occurs outside a relationship.
Even just a solo sexual experience,
Sure.
just sexual satisfaction by yourself. That's also a sexual experience.
Yeah. Things like, again, discover, relief, pleasure, novelty, all those can come outside of relationship context. But we're just talking about the relational context because that's what the season's about. And we want to, again, how does it function in a relationship between 2 people or more, if you want to, how to use it as a productive tool in a relationship. Well, and then the flip side of that is how to recognize and avoid it being destructive in a relationship, which you have some experience with.
I do, yeah. Not surprisingly, because it does mirror my codependent history. So for me, though, like everyone, really, it starts with a solo experience. And my solo experience was fine.
You had access to some of those, what we were just talking about, some of the pleasures that come from sex that don't necessarily have to involve another person or a full-blown relationship. Right.
Pretty quickly I started to be consumed by thoughts of that and thoughts of a lack of that and what that meant and all that. But I was able to pretty easily compartmentalize that also and still just enjoy my solo experience for the most part. It was really when I got to the relational experience where things really started to go sideways for me sexually, because it became all about performance, which again mirrors the way I behaved codependently when it came to any sort of interpersonal interaction. Performance was my main motivation, really. I didn't have what I wanted in mind, what I desired in mind. It was like, what do you want? What do I need to do to make sure that this person is safe?
That this person is having the experience that they want or need.
Yes, because that's what I need to provide.
Again, to refer back to the season 4, there are 2 episodes on the kind of the trauma that came out of that.
Yeah, so we won't rehash any of that. But the thing that happens with this performance mindset is my entire focus is not on what I want out of the sexual experience, which is really obviously very important when it comes to it's a very individual experience that you're sharing with somebody. But for me, it was not about sharing. It was about performing. It was about, what does this person need? So a big problem that was resulting from this performance mindset is that I wasn't getting the connection aspect that we're talking about at all. I wasn't feeling connected to the other person. And in the process, I was losing connection with myself to where I didn't even enjoy the thought of sex at all. So where I was previously enjoying solo experiences, I couldn't anymore. Like it was now the whole idea of sex became consumed by this idea of performance. And then part of the unfortunate result of this performance was that I didn't feel as though I was able to. I wasn't performing well. And then I wasn't satisfying the one and only thing I came to care about with sex, which was performing. And then when I can't perform and I feel as though I wasn't performing, then all I could feel at that point was shame. There's something wrong with me.
So there was both the shame of letting down the other person or being deficient in terms of meeting the other person's needs. And I imagine there's also the shame of betraying yourself, of not being able to meet your own needs for connection and for pleasure.
Yeah, that part was much further under the surface. The main conscious shame that I could feel was just that I wasn't performing. The lack of connection was hard for me to grasp.
I said earlier we were going to talk about kind of good and bad sex, but I mean, I think we can talk about it in terms of the outcomes. And sex that makes you feel shame is bad sex.
Yeah, that's true.
I think that's fair to say. If after a sexual experience you feel shame, then that was bad sex.
Mm-hmm. And during sex, if I'm feeling anxious the whole time, that's not a good sexual experience. So, I mean, the whole experience of sex, even in between. So, yeah, just the whole idea of it made me feel anxious. So this was not a good sexual experience altogether, whether I was having it or not.
So your feelings are a good measure of what makes for good and bad sex. If afterwards you feel connected to the other person or good about yourself or good about your body, that probably means it was good sex. And if you feel bad, if you feel anxious, if you feel shameful, if you feel resentful, that's probably bad sex. But again, if you had a bad feeling in the past, you thought it was an indication there was something wrong with you.
Yes. Yeah. And we've talked about this in recent episodes. That I went straight to shame first. That was the first thing I did, was that I assumed it was something wrong with me. And something wrong with me didn't involve something like useful, like say, maybe it means I don't desire this person, or maybe I'm not enjoying this experience.
Both of those things aren't anything wrong with you.
Yes, exactly. They're not.
But there could be something useful. Like you could say like, oh, I wasn't very attentive, or I was selfish, or I mean, you could have legitimately done something that made the sexual experience not a connecting one, not a positive one for you both. But that's not what was happening. You were just feeling a certain way about it, and you took those feelings as an indication that something was wrong with you. Yeah,
it was basically, a combination of, I didn't physically perform well, and I'm not feeling good. So this has got to be my fault somehow. Somehow this isn't working, and it's my fault. But then, as we've talked about recently with the shame and blame cycle, this was a very, very heavy usage of shame and blame that I used with my sexual experience, because I could not sit in that I could not sit in any shame for very long. So I had to find ways of offloading that shame and blaming the other people for it. And it was just, again, this bouncing back and forth of these two extremes. Either I'm feeling completely worthless, or these other people are doing something to ruin this experience for me. Like, say, you're abusive, therefore that's why I wasn't able to perform, or they don't want it often enough, and that's why I can't perform, or, things like that.
But it was harder for you to lie about. We talked last time about the communication, about certainly the relationship with Jay, that you were kind of able to lie your way out of the shame and blame cycle by pretending that you did have communication and convincing yourself and others that was true. But you couldn't really do that with sex.
Yeah, because either it's happening or it isn't. Right? There's not a lot of gray area there. So I can't convince myself, the sex is good, even though it's not actually happening, or I'm feeling terrible because of it. It was pretty easy for me to fool myself with the communication. It's just like, because again, like we said, there was an outcome. So therefore, I guess must be communicating well because we finished the conversation.
So sex that makes you feel bad, sex that you do not want, is also bad sex.
That's true. Yeah. And that was also what was happening, and which I did not realize, of course, at all. And I remember in the early days of the first of those two relationships where I had to perform, I was being asked to perform, but I had to do it within the context of an abusive situation. And that was very difficult. I had to make this, it's like, well, I'm not feeling attracted to this person, but I'm not consciously thinking that. I'm just like, well, I have to do this. Okay, she just called me stupid, but I still have to initiate the sex act somehow. And I'm betraying myself. It's like, why would I want to do that? But that's what I'm doing. And I just got completely used to that. I have to still initiate sex, even though this person just called me stupid.
So you were having pretty bad sex that was based on performance, a performance mindset. But not to speak for you, but is it fair to say you are now having pretty good sex?
Yes.
That's based on a connection mindset.
But it took a while to get there, even with us. And we talked about this in the previous episodes, like how my sexual experience with us became a healing experience. But a lot of that was hindsight, so these were things that were happening, but I was not conscious that they were happening, so just to recap, it was kind of, we had these three things where there was a safety element where I felt safe because I was safe. You were a safe person. You weren't abusing me. And then there was the mutual desire, being I desired you, you desired me. I could feel both of that. And so there was this system that made me feel connected without me really being conscious of the fact that I felt connected.
But you certainly brought the performance mindset into our relationship.
Yes.
And so I think I took that we were having great sex to mean we had a great sexual connection. But I think you took it, you also felt what was happening was really good.
Yes.
But it was still in this performance mindset. So you still felt that, I guess you were performing well.
Yes. I think I thought that performance had something to do with it at least. Oh, good. Finally, I'm performing well. Something like that. Yeah.
This kind of came out in places. One, when I would try to comment positively about the sex you were having, it would make you nervous, actually.
Yeah. I couldn't receive that. Right. Yeah. Because I mean, part of that being I was not used to exercising my own desire and having desire. And I was approaching it more along the lines of, yeah, I'm performing well. I'm giving you what you want. And therefore, this is a good experience. I'm not really thinking, oh, yeah, am I receiving? Am I able to receive? So you complimenting me, it was a different kind of experience that I had never had before. And it made me anxious. It was like, oh, wait, is there another way I need to be performing here? Like I couldn't communicate about sex at all. That was another thing is I couldn't, I'd never had communicated with anyone effectively about it before. Anyone, not a therapist or anything. Like it just was not something that I talked about. So I didn't talk out loud about my sexual experience. And so even you saying things like that is kind of like initiating a conversation, and it made me really nervous. And
you said some things a few times about not wanting to jinx it or something, as if we talked about it. Because again, this was like we were doing this high wire performance or something. Yeah, if we talked about it or something, one of us must slip, right? Like you didn't feel, as you were saying, secure in the connection. And yeah, this performance was an outlier in your life. So I guess you just didn't want to do anything that might disrupt it.
Yeah. And so that's the other thing. So when you made comments like, say, comments about just any sort of comment out loud about me or our sexual experience, it didn't compute that you would have been talking about our connection. Since I was so performance based, my mind would just go straight to, oh, she's trying to say I have good or bad performance, not like, oh, we have a good connection here. This is working. That's not how I thought of sex.
We've used the analogy of a three-legged stool, the me, the you, the us. That's how you construct this relationship. And I think that's true of a sexual relationship as well. And as it was true with communication, each part, you and me, both bring to a sexual relationship, a sexual past, possibly sexual trauma, individual desires, individual orientations, and none of those are good and bad in a moral sense. But the way they can combine or not combine or clash and form the us can be very complicated and difficult. So one way to get to a connection mindset and to get out of the shame and blame cycle is to think about the us portion in a non-judgmental way, and again, in a functional way. Is this sex that we're having working for both of us and for strengthening our connection, making us feel close to each other, making us feel known to each other and to ourselves?
And that could be really difficult for a lot of people to communicate about, because I think I was not alone in struggling to communicate about sex.
No, I also struggled to communicate about sex. And it was particularly difficult then for us because, we talked about shame venting before. This was an area where you did quite a bit of shame venting early on, because I think you were really struggling to come to grips with what was happening with us and how different it was to what was happening in your previous sexual relationships.
Yeah, and I made no attempts to explain that in my own head in between. So anytime I did try to think about it, it was only in the context of when it came up in a conversation between us. And that was part of the performance, because there was the whole performance of me just communicating. And then I feel as though, wait, I have to have an answer to this. And so I'm just like, so part of the shame venting is just blurting things out that are not processed at all.
Yeah, but it didn't usually come up in conversations, the shame venting about
well,
sex.
That's true.
It came, I think, during or post.
Yes, true. I would just bring these things up.
Well, yeah, because I think it would make you think of your past sexual experiences and you had not processed that. So it would be either you wanted some relief from the shame of that, or you wanted to put some blame on that? I mean, the shame and blame cycle was the only way you knew how to process those experiences, right? Like you didn't know how to put them in the context of what was a productive and positive experience. So you just kind of like blurted them out. And I was like, okay, I don't know what to tell you about that, man. Like I know. There.
Yeah, and now that you're saying this, it's like, yeah, the shame venting seemed like the verbal mechanism for expressing shame and blame, especially in those days where they were completely unresolved. Like I just had these dead end shame and blame cycles that were going around in my head that I made no real attempts at resolving. So maybe if I say this out loud, you'll resolve it for me.
Mm-hmm. We're talking about sex as a tool mainly for connection, but obviously it's also a tool for discovery and knowledge about yourself and knowledge about the other person and knowledge about the relationship. And that none of that happened in your previous sexual relationship. Right. There was no learning whatsoever. I mean, the shame and blame cycle shuts down all potential avenues towards knowledge and understanding.
Yeah, I mean, really, I went backwards is what happened. You know, like, I mean, I feel, yeah, I've had this thought before. If I met you like right as the first person I met, you know, I could have avoided quite a bit of trauma and shame. But, you know, that went for everything, not just sex. But
so when you came into our sexual relationship, and again, it was so different than what you had experienced before, you weren't capable of taking in that information and using it to understand something about your previous relationships and understand something about our relationship and the way that they were different. I mean, this is what now we spent the last however many years doing is achieving that understanding. But at the time, all it did was trigger shame.
Yes.
And then you maybe shame vent to me, or you move to blame and blame vent to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, you know, if you tried to have a conversation, I'd go straight into defensiveness, and then I'd resent you for making me feel shame for bringing up the topic. And it was very messy. And it went on much longer than pretty much any of our other communication issues. Just
to go back to the positive part, I think we have, both of us now, achieved a connection mindset around sex for our relationship. In that we are focused on, are we both having the kind of sex that makes us feel connected and feel good about ourselves and good about each other and good about us as a couple.
Going back for a second to the three-legged stool idea, is I really did need to, and I think this is going to be the case with codependent people in general, is need to spend a little more time on the me leg, quite a bit more time, right? I'm like put all of my effort into the you leg, you know, not even that was not in a useful way, but I needed to get in touch with my desire, that I had to keep in mind that I am entitled to feeling good. I am entitled to pleasure. And that's a hard thing to do when I've been avoiding that fact for most of my life.
Because a three-legged stool, they need to be relatively equally treated. And yeah, I think people with codependent strategies and habits, it's the me part that has been not given enough attention. Whereas you think, you know, people with narcissistic strategies, they might have focused too much on the me part. Mm-hmm. And while your previous partners did, I mean, there was no sense that they had any interest in whether you were getting the sex that you wanted or that it was pleasurable for you, or
right,
the ways in which it's important and not important to you. So for people like yourself, yes, there could be a need to cultivate a healthy sense of entitlement around sex. And we're going to do an episode on entitlement because it's such an interesting word and concept.
Yeah, we haven't given it the season 7 treatment.
Right.
So I think that's going to be the next episode.
But yes, you needed to sink into the fact that you were entitled to pleasure, and that me giving you pleasure was something that should happen in a relationship.
Yeah, and that made it much easier. Once I started to be able to tap into that, made it much easier to receive, because it just, for the longest time, I had a hard time just receiving anything from you, receiving touch, receiving words. When it came to sex, it's just like I had to give. And it just made me very uncomfortable to receive.
So people can have individual thoughts on what great sex is for them personally, for sure. I mean, what they want out of it. But then there is this us level as well, where you're more talking about how it's functioning in the relationship.
Yeah. So what is it providing? And so we can look at the results being like, so with ours, what has it done for us? You know, for us, it has, this connection element of it going all the way back to even when we had difficulty, it provided a lot for us. And it helped us with repair. Yeah, it helped us with conflict.
And really, this whole idea of connection, when we felt distant from each other, it made us feel close. It was a very direct avenue to that feeling of closeness.
Mm-hmm. And then we could use that. We ride that. And I know we've had conversations about this a lot, where it's kind of riding that feeling throughout the day, and it can permeate, and it can permeate when we're having conversations, even when we're having conflicts.
And it's given us both of us access to these feelings that can be a little bit difficult to incorporate into non-partnered sex. Mm-hmm. So apparently, there's research that non-partnered sex, we'll call it, can produce more of a tense physiological response, which kind of makes sense because you know your body the best, right? Mm-hmm. But that partner sex provides a more robust, emotional response. So, it gives us access, both of us, to things like gratitude, feelings of safety, feelings of appreciation, feelings of affection that arise when we have a positive, productive sexual exchange.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Those words that you just listed there are things that I think of in the context of our relationship. They're kind of hard to just provide for yourself.
And again, we're not talking about what is happening during the sex act. There's a million different ways to do that, to achieve a productive sexual connection. And there's no judgment on how you do that. Mm-hmm. It can involve other people, it can involve food, it can involve interesting places, and whatever it is. Is the outcome one in which both of you feel this sense of closeness, of connection, of safety, appreciation, affection?
So to sum this up again, the question is the sex that we are having making us both feel connected to each other and to ourselves?
Right, because you don't want to achieve the connection with your partner at your own expense, at your expense of betraying who you are and what you need. And this is a question that we literally ask some form of to each other
on a regular basis. Yeah, it's something that it's good to revisit. All of these tools. These are ongoing tools.
Are we using them productively? So we hope you'll join us in a couple of weeks, and we'll take up the tool of entitlement, I guess.
Yes, thank you.